recalcitrant tribes heard orthodox wisdom sprang in Caucasia and Thule. The glory of the emperor stretched to the ends of the world. In the season of Midmost Sophia, the word of the emperor established a kingdom in Britain. They sang in Sophia the immaculate conception of wisdom. Carbonek, Camelot, Caucasia were gates and containers, intermediations of light, geography, breathing geometry, the double-fledged Logos. The blind rulers of Logres nourished the land on a fallacy of rational virtue. The seals of the saints were broken, the chairs of the table reeled. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Inkling Review. And before we go any further, don't forget to like and subscribe because we've got new content here on the channel every week, every Sunday at noon. There's a new episode, so make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss anything. But of course, this week on the channel, we're at the Inkling Review, and as I said last month, this month is looking at Charles Williams' Arthurian Cycle, and I've got it here in a single volume, but it's actually 2 volumes, Taliessin through Logos, and the Region of the Summer Stars. So, when we first met Charles Williams the last time around, when we looked at Descent into Hell, we found a writer whose passion flooded through his prose to create beautiful imagery that could not help but communicate to us the certain ideas that he had, particularly that of substitution and exchange. But Williams had success as a novelist, but he didn't want to have success as a novelist, really. What he wanted was success as a poet. And much of his poetry can be described as it's romantic in idea, but modernist in style. And this really left him with no one who was really particularly interested in him for a long time. He had plenty of friends who thought he was talented, but his poetry just never found an audience. And yet, he kept building his skills through poems, through plays, through his novels. And finally, at the end of his life, he brought everything he learned to bear on this cycle of Arthurian poetry, which he had been fascinated with his entire life. And brings these skills to bring... In the Inklings, the only person who does a greater job of world building is J.R.R. Tolkien. And in these 2 poems, Williams, at times, rivals Tolkien's ability there. So, without further ado, let's talk about Taliessin through Logres and Region of the Summer Stars. So what's the story? Well, the story is complicated. Williams does not write a single narrative here. What he does is create a series of episodes. So this is not an epic poem, but which is why I use the phrase poetic cycle. It's a series of episodes. There are a couple things that kind of anchor these different, the narrative of the cycle. One, of course, is Arthur himself and the mistake that Arthur makes of out of pride. The great sin of Camelot here is not the romantic triangles. The great sin in this cycle is that Arthur comes to think that he is as great as the emperor, and Williams is telling that is going to be putting yourself on the same level of God. You're messing with God's plan if you do that. So that pride is the original sin that allows a lot else in. One of the other most important thing is the story of the Grail, which is really the story of Lancelot and Galahad, and how Lancelot's affair with he of course has his affair with Guinevere, but he has one affair also with the Lady Elaine, which produces Galahad. And in a wonderful poem, he literally turns into a wolf. His madness of having broken his courtly love vows to Guinevere lead him to a madness, and he actually tries to even eat Galahad as he's born, but of course he fails, and Galahad becomes the pure prince who can achieve the Grail. The other relationship that kind of anchors the whole thing is actually three different relationships. Williams was really into the idea of courtly love, and so there are actually three different examples that you keep coming back to. You have, of course, Guinevere and Lancelot, which is filled with passion as they both engage in the affair with each other. And then there's Lamorak, who's also considered one of the great knights of the Arthurian world. And he he's in a relationship with Queen Morgause, who is stone. So it's she takes everything and gives nothing back, and he would never betray her, but it damages him a great deal. And then there is the love triangle of Tristan, Isolde, and Palamedes. I'm not certain I'm saying his name correctly, because I've never heard it aloud, but Palamedes is this great passion of love for Isolde that gives him salvation. He converts from being the Saracen who comes to the world of King Arthur and becomes a Christian. But ultimately, because it's unrequited, it also begins to damage him as well. So you get these three different relationships. And there's one other thing that really anchors the story, and that's the title character of the first volume, Taliessin, who is the court poet. And Taliessin is really dealing with ideas about how we should interact with each other. And it really comes down to those ideas of substitution and exchange that we talked about last time we were with Williams in Descent into Hell. And that really, and Taliessin's role is really about how the proper way we should interact with each other as you go through the poems. And there's other small storylines that kind of go throughout, but they all interact to try and create this one big tapestry of ideas and emotions that Williams is trying to put together. So it's tough to explain beyond that. The other thing that's really important, though, to understand this is an idea that if you don't realize it, maybe you don't pick up on it, and that is that Williams thought that if the Holy Grail is going to be in the mythology, it can't just be an episode of the mythology, which was his big criticism of people like Tennyson and his Idols of the King, and other tellings, including Le Morte d'Arthur, which is one of the original complete tellings. He thought that if the Holy Grail is there, then it has to be at the center, and that's what makes this one of the most unique works of Arthurian literature and the great contribution to Arthurian literature in the 20th century. He puts the Holy Grail at the center. I do not necessarily mean the actual cup, but what he considered the ideas of the Grail, what that image meant. And Williams is always really big about using images to communicate deeper meanings. So the deeper meanings of the Grail are throughout these poems, even if the cup itself is not always there. But he really tried to put the Grail right at the center. And so, but beyond me trying to hit all these different threads, the best way you're going to see it for yourself is go read it. So after you finish watching this video, go read it. So what are the strengths of this book? Well, the strengths of the book are the fact that Williams's poetry, much like his prose, demands an emotional response. It pulls it out of you, even when maybe you aren't looking for it. As I mentioned at the top of the video, his world building here is really quite phenomenal. When I first read these two volumes, I described it to somebody as a map just rolled out in my mind's eye and was populated by this world. And there's not many times in reading that you really get that just full sensation. And for me personally, the only other thing that has ever really done that to me is Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien and the rest of Middle-earth. So Williams's world-building imagination here is fantastic. The other thing that's he does great here is that just, again, it's raw emotion at times, but he layers all these different metaphors and imagery on top of each other, and so there's always, so even though you're getting an emotional response out of it, intellectually there's always something else to find, and that's quite impressive as well. So what are the weaknesses? Well, the weaknesses kind of comes down to the modernist style. Modernism in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, where Williams built his skill out of. Being complicated was a virtue. Being difficult to understand was a virtue. And I think of the, so read The Wasteland, and how much of The Wasteland do you really understand without the help of people who have studied it for years? Ezra Pound was, James Joyce. These are people who, the complexity of the prose itself, the complications of the prose itself, those were virtues. But I think those are weaknesses at the end, with especially our mind today. I would have said it was a weakness at the time, but I think it's tough to understand in a lot of places. You will always get something out of it, but you'll also always feel like you're missing something. And that can be, again, it's both a strength and a weakness, and in some ways it's the kind of flip side of this, of the strengths. So how do I rank this book? I'm giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I'm not going to go the full 5 because there are just parts that are really tough to understand. But again, intellectually, emotionally, you're going to get so much out of this book. And the world building is, again, only Tolkien does it better within the group. Alright, everybody, thanks for joining us this month on the Inkling Review. Next month, we're going to be looking, we're going to actually start a cycle of, through our authors, of looking at their theological works. So we're going to start with Tolkien, who is the least blatant theological writer of the group. But he had an essay called On Fairy Stories, where he talks, yes, he's talking about writing and the importance of fairy stories, but he's also talking about some really important theological ideas to him. And so that's where we're going to start before we go through a few other works from the other writers as well. So look forward to going over those the next few episodes of the Inkling Review with you. But make sure you like and subscribe, because again, we have new content every Sunday here on the channel. So I don't want you to miss anything. So please hit that subscribe button and join us next week, and of course next month here on the Inkling Review. All right, everybody, y'all have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you soon.